This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
We're now looking at the chapter headed Exchange Rate Determination, where what we're going to be looking at in the calculations is forecasting future exchange rates, future spot rates. And it's nothing directly to do with what the earlier chapters on foreign exchange risk management. It's more relevant, it's only relevant in the exam, for discounted cash flow questions when you're investing abroad. I'll remind you why later. Before I show you the calculations, which are very straightforward, a little bit of discussion. You'll see there's a bit typed there. And the first says influences on exchange rates. Why do exchange rates change? You know full well from what we did on exchange rate risk, that from day to day exchange rates move. Well, there are all sorts of factors influence the exchange rate. You'll see there the rates of the inflation in different countries, that'll have an impact. The interest rates in different countries, if one country's got a higher interest rate, people want to put money into that company to get the higher interest. And the supply and demand, if more people are buying the currency, it puts the cost up. Economic and political prospects. You know, if you think a company is going to do badly economically in the future, it's likely to push down the value of the currency. The balance of payments, the difference between what they're importing from abroad and what they're exporting. If you're importing more from America, let's say, than you're exporting, you need dollars to pay for it. If there's more demand for dollars, it puts the value of the dollar up. So all sorts of factors affect the exchange rate. And importantly, I've written at the bottom, it's expectation. You know, it doesn't matter if the economy is doing well at the moment. If you expect, or if traders expect the economy is going to suffer, then the currency is likely to suffer as well. This government approaches to exchange rate management. Most countries these days have what we call floating exchange rates. Where the exchange rate does change from day to day. It's determined by the market, and it's all those factors that we spoke about. That from day to day, exchange rates go up, exchange rates go down, depending on expectations. Now, those are floating exchange rates, and as I say, most countries these days have floating rates. The alternative is to have fixed exchange rates, which still apply in some countries, where the exchange rate doesn't move, it's fixed by government. Here's the exchange rate against the dollar, and it's fixed at that. Market forces have no effect, you know, you've no choice. Now, as I've said, most countries these days tend to have floating rates, but to an extent, they will what we call manage them. They'll let market forces determine the exchange rate, but they'll keep an eye on it. If things get really extreme, the government might step in. Because, you see, if the exchange rate really is collapsing, it's going to cause real economic problems. You know, it puts the cost of imports up a lot and so on. And so occasionally, a government might step in. At one extreme, they can devalue the currency. I'm old, I remember that happening in the UK. It was floating, but the pound was collapsing. So the government stepped in and fixed a new rate, and then allowed it to start floating again. Stepping in other ways, you know, they could increase interest rates deliberately to put the increase the value of the currency, because again, perhaps it was getting too low. So that's managed floating, but effectively it's floating. It's only in extreme cases that they would step in. And you'll see actually I have written, only out of interest, not really relevant for the exam, but developed countries until 1971, there was something called the Bretton Woods Agreement, and what happened is after the war, they sat down and they fixed exchange rates. Pound against the dollar was a fixed rate. In those days, the French had francs, the Italians had liras. They were all fixed exchange rates. And it was only in 1971 that those system collapsed and they went to floating rates. However, that was just a bit of background. And more importantly, as far as the numbers are concerned, it's a question of, in the exam, being able to forecast future exchange rates. And although it's impossible to forecast accurately because there are all these different factors affected, if you're ever asked to forecast in the exam, we forecast based on relative inflation rates. Relative inflation rates in the two countries. Now there is a formula, and in fact you should have seen this before in the previous financial management exam, but whether you did or you didn't, or you remember or you don't, let's check. And here again, as usual, rather than just blindly quote a formula, I think it is important that you see the logic we're using, just in case there's a bit of writing, even though for the numbers you actually won't waste time. But we use something called purchasing power parity. What we do is this. Look at my little illustration on the next page. It says that an item currently costs 100 in the UK. That's today's price. Today, the exchange rate against the dollar to the pound, is 150. And remember, that means $1.5 equals £1. And so the equivalent price of that item in the US, if it's $1.5 to the pound, it would be $150. No problem. There's inflation. It's 2% a year in the UK, 4% a year in the US. So in 1 year's time, the price in both countries will have gone up by inflation. In the UK it's 2%, so the price will have gone up to £102. In the US inflation is 4%, so it will have gone up to $156. Well, ignoring all other factors which exist in real life, we say the exchange rate must change to keep the two equivalent. For £102 to be equivalent to $156. And so, what would be the exchange rate in a year? Well, quoting in the same way, obviously, dollars to the pound. How many dollars will equal a pound? Well, if $156 equals £102, the dollars per pound, 156 divided by 102, it'll be 1.53. Now, I know for foreign exchange risk management, we quote exchange rates to 4 decimal places. I've already said, and I've yet to fully remind you, but if you are asked to do this in the exam, it'll be part of an investment appraisal question. And there, you only need to do it to 2 decimal places. Well, that idea of it being the inflation rates determine the exchange rate is known as purchasing power parity. And you are given the formula in the exam. It's on the last page, it's the last item on the first page of the formula sheets. I'll remind you afterwards what the second formula is, but the relevant one here is the first formula, that S0 equals S1 times 1 plus HC over 1 plus HB. And of course in the exam, you don't want to waste time doing what I did before, even though it's right. You may as well just stick the figure straight in the formula, but as always, the problem is, what do the symbols mean? So make sure you remember. S0 is the spot rate now. I've written it the wrong way around. It was S1 equals S0. Oops. Sorry, S0 is the spot rate now. S1 is the spot in 1 year, which is what we're after. H, well, I don't know why the examiner chose H, but H is the inflation rate in each of the two countries. The problem is remembering which is which. Now, it's up to you to find your own way of remembering which is which. But the way I remember it, which may sound a bit stupid, is HB is inflation in, well, I say B for base country. Whereas HC is the inflation, well, I can't think of anything that C could stand for. It's the other country. Well, that's fine, as long as, if you are remembering it this way, how do we determine which one of the two is the base country? By base country, I mean the currency we're quoting against. So you see, in our last example, the exchange rate in the illustration that I went through, it was dollar-pound 150. So the dollar was being quoted against the pound. $1.5 is £1. We're quoting against the pound, that would be the base country. If you had a quote, pound against the euro, that would be the number of pounds for 1 euro. Well, for this formula, euro would be the base country. So, as long as you remember which is which the right way round, this now becomes terribly easy. There are two examples. I don't know why I've written two. I'm going to do one. I'm not going to waste time on the second. You can have a go at the second yourself. There's an answer at the back of the notes. But example one. The exchange rate, the current spot, is dollar to the pound 1.7. It wants to know what the exchange rate, first of all, in 1 year's time. Well, using the formula, S1, the rate in a year's time, will be the current spot of 1.7. The inflation rates, well, again, because it's quoted against the pound is the base country. So the other country is the US, inflation's 1.05. Base country, the UK, 1.02. It gives a forecast exchange rate in a year's time of 1.75. Here, it wants the exchange rate in 2 years. Well, we do exactly the same thing. We say, all right, in 1 year it was 1.75. But if there's another year's inflation at 5 and another year at 2, then again 1.05 over 1.02. The exchange rate in 2 years' time you'd be forecasting at 1.80. Now I told you already that where this stands to be relevant, and is quite commonly relevant, is in a big NPV question where they're setting up an operation in another country. And if you remember, look back if you need, but you'll do all the cash flows as normal in the foreign currency. Maybe here, in America, you do it all in dollars. But when you've got the net cash flow, they're then remitted to the home country. So you'd have to convert to the home country's currency, maybe pounds. Which is fine, except of course your cash flows are in 1 year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 4 years' time, whatever. And so the year 1 flow should convert at the forecasted rate in 1 year, the year 2 flows at the forecast rate in 2 years, and on we go. And of course there's no reason why the inflation rate should stay constant. Here, the inflation rates in the US were 5%, in the UK 2% for each of those first 2 years. But the question could tell you that in the 3rd year, maybe the inflation rate in the US went to 6%, in the UK went to 3%. You know, it can change each year. Well, no problem. If the first 2 years the inflation was 5 and 2, there we are. There's the forecast spot. If in the 3rd year it was 6 and 3, then the forecast for the spot in 3 years' time, well, it was 1.80 after 2 years. Multiply by 1 plus the foreign inflation, divided by 1 plus the base country inflation, and what do we get? 1.8 times 1.06 divided by 1.03, 1.85. As I say, it is common to have investing abroad. And the minute you saw, they will give you a list of the inflation rates each year. And so you're a little bit all on its own. Forecast the future exchange rates. And then you can carry on as we did before. In the example we did earlier, I gave you the exchange rates in each of the, I think it was 5 years. But I did say at the time, more likely you'd have to forecast, and it gives a little bit of extra work. All right, I've already said I'm not going to go through example 2. I mean, I really shouldn't need to. Do it yourself and check the answer at the back. Also, just because it was there, let me remind you, the formula sheet does have those 2 formulae. The first one, the one we're dealing with, is purchasing power parity. And purchasing power parity is used for forecasting future spot rates. The second formula, though, is exactly the same, except it uses I instead of H. It's interest rate parity, where it's the same formula but using interest rates instead of inflation rates. Well, I did mention before, this formula is used for calculating forward rates. I did mention that when we dealt with money market hedging. I did say that forward rates is not the banks guessing on a rate to apply in a year's time. They are actually doing money market hedging. Although strangely enough, although that was tested in the earlier financial management paper, in this paper, I can't remember a single time they've ever tested you on that. The formula has been irrelevant. If you're forecasting future rates, you use purchasing power parity. It's inflation. We've just done it. You're never asked to calculate forward rates. You're expected to be able to use forward rates, and we've dealt with it. You're expected to be able to do money market hedging, and we've dealt with it. But you've never been actually asked to calculate the forward rate it's been given. Anyway, That's enough, but do have a go at example 2 and do check it.